We all know this story, right? A massive, luxurious ocean liner, a devastating strike against an iceberg, and a freezing, tragic night in the North Atlantic. But today, we're going to look way past the Hollywood romance and a century of folklore. In this explainer, we're treating the Titanic like a modern, rigorous forensic engineering investigation. We are digging directly into the blueprints, the materials, and the absolute cascade of technical errors that doomed this supposedly unsinkable vessel long before it ever left the dock. Let's get right into it. Right off the bat, we have to ask, could this disaster actually have been prevented? It's so incredibly easy to look back at history and view massive tragedies as just inevitable fate. Like it was simply meant to be that the ship would strike that exact piece of ice on that specific night. But when we approach this as engineers, a very different and honestly much more unsettling picture emerges. Because every disaster leaves a trail of evidence, right? A series of what-ifs and if-onlys. And as we trace the physical mechanics of this tragedy, the trail of evidence left by this engineering marvel is absolutely staggering. There was this massive, glaring gap between the myth of the unsinkable ship and the physical reality taking shape in the shipyards. During the design phase, the marketing and public imagination absolutely ran wild. The public was sold a fortress of the sea, a true engineering marvel that had conquered nature. But behind the scenes, the builders were constantly making compromises. Just as one example, to maintain expansive, luxurious deck space for first-class passengers, critical lifeboats were deemed unnecessary clutter and significantly reduced in number. This myth of invincibility created a fatal, false sense of security that permeated every single level of the ship's operation, from the boardroom all the way down to the boiler room. And that brings us to the core issue. Engineering hubris. We're talking about extreme pride or overconfidence in a technical design that leads directly to critical oversights. This isn't just about arrogance, it's a profound psychological blind spot that physically manifests in the very blueprints of a project. When you truly believe you've conquered the elements, well, you stop looking for the flaws in your own armor. It meant that worst-case scenarios were brushed aside by experts as sheer impossibilities. The ship wasn't just built with steel and iron, it was built with an overwhelming, fatal dose of hubris. So that hubris set off a cascading chain of fatal decisions. You see, complex disasters of this magnitude almost never happen because of one single error. It's like a giant puzzle of failures. Think about it. If the iron rivets hadn't been filled with a high content of brittle slag, if the watertight compartments had been built just a few decks higher, or if the ship's speed had been reduced in the dark, any single broken link in that chain could have averted the tragedy. The ice was literally just the final catalyst that exposed this long, fragile, and completely hidden chain of prior engineering mistakes. When you trace it out chronologically, the sequence of failures is wild. The seeds of disaster were planted years in advance during the design phase, which locked in those critical structural flaws. Fast forward to the days and hours before the collision, and we see operational choices compounding the danger, like the decision to maintain dangerously high speeds through a known, documented ice field. And why? Driven by the intense pressure to arrive on time and uphold this grand reputation. Finally, in just a matter of a few short hours, all of those previous compromises culminated in a catastrophic structural failure. To truly wrap our heads around these failures, we have to separate the signal from the noise. We have to strip away the century of emotion, drama, and legend that completely clouds the event. We need to look strictly at what the debris field on the ocean floor actually tells us, what metallurgical tests on the recovered steel prove, and what the original shipbuilder's blueprints mandated. It's all about applying a strict scientific method to a historical tragedy to find out exactly why the structure failed. No fluff, just the engineering facts. Now, it's absolutely vital to distinguish our verified data from expert interpretation here. We have indisputable facts, like we know for a fact the steel plates had a chemical composition that made them highly brittle in freezing temperatures. We also know the bulkheads were simply too low. This allowed water to disastrously spill over from one compartment to the next, kind of like an overfilled ice cube tray, as the bow dipped. On the flip side, how exactly the massive ship broke apart on the surface, or its precise, minute-by-minute angle of descent, those remain highly educated interpretations modeled by advanced modern software. So, to keep our investigation rigorous, we're strictly categorizing our findings into three buckets: verified established facts, expert engineering interpretations, and unresolved historical questions. Doing this helps us completely avoid unsupported speculation. And honestly, admitting what we still don't know, like the exact sequence of certain ignored operational communications in those final terrifying minutes, ensures that our core engineering arguments remain rock solid. This structured approach is what separates a compelling, factual explanation from just another maritime story.
Bringing all of our forensic evidence together, we have to confront our core premise one more time. Was it preventable? When we look closely at that chain of structural mistakes and the timeline of fatal decisions, the answer is a resounding, deeply tragic yes. The physical collision itself might have been a freak accident of nature, sure, but the sinking and the massive, catastrophic loss of life was a choice. It was preventable in the drafting rooms in Belfast years earlier. It was preventable in the boardrooms that slashed lifeboat numbers for pure aesthetics. And it was absolutely preventable on the bridge of the ship that cold, moonless night.
Which leads us to a pretty fascinating twist. Was the ultimate failure mechanical, or was it psychological? I mean, it's incredibly easy to blame brittle steel, weak rivets, and short bulkheads. But who chose that steel? Who approved those blueprints and actually signed off on those bulkheads? The mechanical failures were, in reality, simply symptoms of a much deeper psychological failure. It was that unwavering, arrogant belief in human supremacy over nature. The ship was perfectly designed to survive the conditions its creators arrogantly assumed it would face, but it was completely unequipped for the harsh reality of the actual ocean. The lasting legacy of this disaster is a chilling reflection on human error, engineering hubris, and the true cost of these mistakes. It serves as a timeless, urgent warning about the extreme dangers of overconfidence and the paramount importance of respecting immense, unpredictable forces. As we continue to push the boundaries of technology, artificial intelligence, and modern engineering today, this story remains a crucial reminder that no creation is ever truly unsinkable if it's built on a foundation of hubris. So I want to leave you with this to ponder. What modern, unsinkable projects might be repeating these very same hidden mistakes today?